Good morning, everybody. We are here in the Japanese garden at the Missouri Botanical Garden today. I am Kristina. This is Cassidy. And we are here today, as you can see, to show you the peak cherry blossom, the beginning of peak week. So the cherry blossom trees are looking really great right now. We're expecting them to be at or near full bloom all week. So right now the cherry trees that we're standing underneath are the Yoshino cherries. And I'll go ahead and turn this camera around so we can show you them up close. Now just a week ago, we were underneath these same trees and they weren't in bloom at all. And you can see how quickly that changed. Let's keep walking and see some more of these beautiful blossoms.
And this whole hillside here at the entrance to the Japanese garden is covered in these Yoshino cherries. And a number of these, this is actually the same variety of cherries that makes the DC cherry blossom so famous. And we actually have a number of trees that are descendants of those DC cherries that were taken as cuttings from the trees in DC that were part of an original gift from Japan to the United States in the early 1900s. So a cool connection to the history of cherry blossoms here at the Missouri Botanical Garden and that tie-in to DC.
You can see, if we'll step back a little bit here, just how many of these Yoshino cherries there are here on this cherry hill. And we should mention that we are closed on Mondays, but we will be open starting tomorrow. We're open Tuesday through Sunday, and the rest of this week is going to be a great time to come view these cherry blossoms while they're at their peak. We have been selling out of our capacity. We're still at limited 25% capacity due to COVID-19. So definitely would advise saving your tickets ahead of time, getting your tickets and saving your spot. With this nice weather and all these beautiful cherry trees, it's been selling out pretty often. So
yeah, and I can tell you, Kristina, I was here on Saturday, which was a day that we did sell out, and the nice thing is that even though it's busy and crowded, certainly by what we may be used to in pandemic standards, there really was still plenty of room to be outside, but I would recommend getting those tickets early because we were sold out so early. And we have about 150 cherry trees here, mostly in the Japanese garden, but there are a few others scattered throughout the rest of the Missouri Botanical Garden as well. We have 50 or so of these Yoshino cherries, which are these ones with these beautiful white blooms that we just walked past and that we still have back behind us here. And there's one there along the creek and a few up here above the waterfall. We have about 50 of these Yoshino cherries, and then you'll see as we walk through some of the other varieties that are also in bloom, the weeping cherries among them, which are also at their peak right now. But this is kind of the showstopper part of the collection that everybody wants to know about, are these Yoshino cherries. And I'd say, as of today, they're in that sort of few days where they're at their most peak with the most amount of blooms open. And that's a big change even from just Saturday, and I think part of the reason for that is it was so warm and sunny on Saturday. Nice and sunny yesterday, even though it wasn't as warm, and nice and sunny today. So the trees are just loving that extra energy and showing off because of it. As we sort of come around this bend here, well, actually, let's take a look back this way. So you can see, again, all the Yoshino cherries here. And then if we turn around over here, up along this ridge, you can see some of the weeping cherries here, and that's one way to kind of distinguish, is a lot of these weeping cherries have a soft pink color to them. And so that sets them apart a little bit visually from the Yoshinos and Cherry Hill that we just left. And here's another thing. We're going to talk mostly about cherries today, but this is flowering quince. And so that's in bloom here too. Lots of red blooms, kind of hidden in the foliage a little bit, with some nice color there. That's in the rose family.
And speaking of other things that are in bloom, you'll see a lot of these magnolias around the Japanese garden right now, which are also just about at their peak bloom. These here are the star magnolias.
And that's the dominant type of magnolia we have here in the Japanese garden, but there are many other types of magnolias, saucer magnolias and things that are at or near, or maybe even just a little past peak throughout the garden. But the star magnolia, Magnolia stellata, is really the, no pun intended, is the star here in the Japanese garden. Actually, if we come this way a little bit, you'll see some more color that we're keeping our eye on. This is a red bud. And nothing open yet, no blooms here. But the color, that red on the bud for the flowers, is so pronounced you can still pick it out of the landscape. And so that is, those buds have really started to swell just in the last week, and I think we'll see that bloom of this Missouri native tree in the next week or two as well, especially with the nice weather. And then you have one of these weeping cherries back here. You can see a little bit where the branches of the two trees overlap. So as these blossoms on the weeping cherry start to fade, you'll have this red bud here kind of take over with its own display of pink.
We have a question from Julie asking if the star magnolias grow tall or if they stay as bushes. And these are specially trimmed by our horticulture staff in the Japanese garden. So these will stay this smaller size, but a star magnolia will grow if it's not trimmed to full size. Or full tree size, I suppose I should specify, for a magnolia. Here's another one of these really pretty weeping cherries. We also have a question, are the tulips in bloom? And they are just beginning to bloom. So yes, there are some. They're not quite at their peak yet, but they're getting started for sure.
Yeah, and on the central axis, so outside the climatron where we have a big annual display of tulips, the side of that axis that's in the sun all the time actually has a lot of tulips that are open, and the other side that's in the shade of some trees is not quite open yet. So as far as that big display goes, yeah, we're still another week or two away, but there are places where you can see some tulips in bloom now. And I would say stay tuned to our virtual tours throughout the spring, as we'll shift our focus to all the different collections that are in bloom. So today we're in the Japanese garden highlighting everything here, but we'll move around and make sure that we're showing off the tulips when they get to their peak as well.
And I'll mention again, just for anyone who's just now tuning in, that we are closed today, but we'll be open tomorrow, and Tuesday through Sunday we'll be open for the rest of the week. With this nice weather and these cherry blossoms reaching their peak bloom, we have been reaching our capacity every day. So we definitely recommend reserving your tickets ahead of time. You can do that at mobot.org/visit.
We took a walk here onto the Zigzag bridge, and we've mentioned this on a couple of our previous tours, but just starting a few weeks ago, we've opened all the outdoor areas when the garden is open. So the Zigzag bridge is one of those places that have been closed for a little while, and it is now open, and I can tell you it is very popular with the children, as it always has been, but it also is just a great vantage point to see these weeping cherries here across the lakeshore. And you can see these are actually all the same variety of cherry tree. So it's Prunus pendula, and even though it's all the same type of cherry tree, you can see the variation in color here, where some of it is pink and some of it is definitely a little bit more on the white side.
Oh, we have some geese moving in behind us here, if you heard that big splash. I saw someone comment something about them making a lot of noise when they visited over the weekend. They certainly are a bit dramatic here, especially in this corner of the Japanese garden.
I think, you know, what they're fighting for, Kristina, is some territory here.
Yeah.
And the geese are particularly fond of Tortoise Island, which is just over here as a nesting ground. And they'll also try to nest in these beds here around the Zigzag bridge, which are for the water iris. And we actually intentionally try to keep them out of these beds from nesting because they're so close to the public, and because we don't want them to disturb the water irises that you can see are already coming up. That bloom time for the water irises here along the Zigzag bridge is more early to mid-June, so still a ways away there. But primo location for the geese.
Definitely.
And they are not shy about it. And here, as we come up the steps here, I'll just point this out as well, Kristina, in terms of another spring bloomer that we're looking out for. This is dogwood, and you can see these little buds have started to break just a little bit. Still, again, a few weeks away from this getting really showy, but just one of those reminders that everything is really kind of kicking into gear. And as one collection comes into peak, there's another one right behind it that's ready to go. So the dogwoods throughout the garden and throughout the neighborhoods here in St. Louis, it's a Missouri native tree. Let's actually go up over the hill here, because one of these cherries is kind of neat. When we talked about all the different species and varieties and things that we have here at the garden, and these trees are a type Prunus subfertila, and the variety is autumnalis. If the name gives you any kind of clue, they're actually cherry trees that will bloom twice. So they'll bloom now in the spring, and then the autumnalis part is that they will bloom again in the fall. It's usually not quite as showy in the fall, but sort of neat to think about a tree that isn't just saving its showiness for the spring when everything else is blooming. So yeah, this one right here it's called autumnalis, and if you're here and the conditions are right and you're here on the right day in the fall, you'll see this tree blooming again. But kind of neat because it's not necessarily the same in the same numbers or showiness as the weeping cherries or the Yoshinos, but nonetheless pretty and worth making a stop. I also noticed as we were walking in the grass, we've got lots of little violets coming up, so you probably have some of these in your own yard as well. Just more spring color. So we're gonna come a little bit closer here to these weeping cherries. And you'll notice we're doing our best to hide it, but you may notice some work happening here on the Koi Bridge. So that's one of the things that happens on these Mondays when we're closed, is that we have crews that are able to do work that would be much harder to do when we're open to visitors, and especially on a week like this when we'll be pretty close to capacity. So they're doing some work on the Koi Bridge, but it should be open tomorrow when everybody comes to visit. I know on Saturday with the sun and the warmer temperatures, the koi were out, they were hungry. I'd recommend picking up a few bags of fish food at the gift shop before you make your way out here. And definitely kept my daughters entertained for a good while. I was thinking about this, Kristina. We were at this same point about this time last year, showing off the cherries on a virtual tour. And if you look behind us here, this is Magnolia Avenue, runs along the south edge of the garden. And last year at this time, everything was still this beautiful, and we were having to tell people, we're sorry, you can't come in. This is the only place you can
Yes.
come and see the cherry trees is stand on the other side of the fence along Magnolia or over there on Alfred. And it is so great that we are open this time around this spring for people to come and visit and see up close. Not only are we open Tuesday through Sunday, I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but we are open for some additional evening hours on Friday night coming up, to allow some extra time to really see these cherry blossoms at their peak. So again, take advantage of the fact that we are allowed to be open this year, and come and join us and see all these cherries in bloom. Let's see if we can skirt around some of this work. We'll take you on a little detour because there's one other spot with some cherries in bloom and a type of cherry we haven't talked about yet. So we'll go around the work there and take you over to the Plum viewing arbor. I'll point this out since we're walking past it. This is a cherry tree too. A little different than the ones that we've been showing off. You know, when we say flowering cherry, all the cherries flower in one way or another. This is a black cherry, which is actually a Missouri native tree. Gets much bigger than the ornamental varieties that we've been showing off today. And it will flower at some point too. It's not quite there yet. But just kind of neat since we're showing off all the different kinds of cherries. This one is a little bit different in size and in the bloom time as well, because it's not blooming yet. And I'll mention this too, since we're here. This is not a cherry tree. This is a pear, also known as a calorie pear, Bradford pear. They come in a lot of different names, a lot of different varieties. You'll see these in bloom right now too. They're a super popular street tree. They're also a highly invasive species, so you'll see these along roadsides, all along the highways, on sort of those margins of the highways. That's a tree that's in bloom as well. And if you're thinking about planting a flowering tree somewhere in your own landscape, in your own yard, we would recommend against planting a Bradford pear, Calorie pear, also Cleveland Select I think is another one of the names. So that's worth knowing about if you go to a home improvement store or a nursery center and you see all these bundles of flowering trees. It's worth knowing what is and isn't recommended for planting, and the Calorie pear being one that definitely recommended against. And there are lots of other things you could plant instead. All these cherries we mentioned and are showing off today do well. There are some other native flowering trees, small trees that are good alternatives. There's American Plum, which is another cherry relative. And then there's also serviceberry, which is in that same botanical family, the rose family. All these cherries are in the rose family. And serviceberry is another alternative. So again, you're kind of seeing the different scope here of the types of trees we have. And as we come up here to the Plum viewing arbor, we'll see another different variety.
So these cherry trees here at the Plum viewing arbor are the cherry plum trees, as you can see. That's where this area gets its name. And this variety is called Thundercloud. And these are really nice. They have these beautiful dark red, sort of burgundy leaves that come out around the same time as the flowers bloom. Very light pink flowers on this one. And this is just a really nice spot. You can see from here across the lake other cherry trees and magnolias in bloom. So this is a great spot to come for cherry blossom blooming. And this is kind of neat, actually. Right here we have a spider web that's been catching some of the falling petals. You can see those hanging in the air there. That's very cool. So I'm not sure how well the camera is catching it, but there are a lot of really lovely falling petals just floating to the ground. You can see here, this is evidence of that. That's been going on all morning.
And that is one of the things that kind of dictates how long the peak for these cherry blossoms last, are things like the wind and the rain, and those can knock some petals back, have the potential to anyway. So luckily there's not really a whole lot of issues with that in the forecast for this week. And that's not to say one single rain is going to make everything go away. In fact, we had those storms on Saturday night, and you can see here across the lake, all of these trees were in full bloom on Saturday morning, and they have still retained quite a bit of their petals. So it's not it's not a make or break thing, but they are, those blossoms are very delicate, and they will only last in a full show for about a week, even in good weather conditions, before they start wafting to the ground.
So thank you everyone for tuning in to this tour today. We hope you can make it sometime this week to see these in person. And we'll see you again next week for more bloom updates. In the meantime, we'll end on this beautiful view of the lake, the blue sky, and the cherry trees blooming in the background. See you next time.